It's the Martin binding episode. Everyone who makes repair videos has to have a Martin binding episode. Most of us simply adore dealing with this issue. Because yeah, Martin has an issue with binding coming loose. Have you heard? If you hang around various Facebook guitar groups, you'll hear a lot of opinions, many from people who have no clue what they're talking about when it comes to this. We could talk about the history of the problem, but you gotta know, there is no official account or timeline. There's data that's been accumulated in an ad hoc kind of way by repair people and interested collectors or players, but it's still kind of loosey-goosey. And yes, there have been other times when Martins have lost their binding. Short runs where the adhesive wasn't good, or the router bits maybe that were used to cut the binding ledges were dull and glazed the channels with rosewood resin, preventing the proper penetration and causing a loose bond. The issue we're talking about here, however, is more widespread, and it's caused by inadequate adhesive. And it seems to have started around, is it 2010 or is it 2012? Yes, your guitar from 2009 may also have lost its binding. I don't need to know. You don't have to tell me about it. The problem is endemic, though. Throughout the 2010s, whole decade, Martin switched to a less volatile and nasty glue, and this is what's happened. Let's step back. The best combination of plastic binding and adhesive ever invented was probably old-school celluloid binding and the solvent-based glue, usually acetone. It physically melted the plastic and made it runny enough to seep into the pores of the binding channel. Now, celluloid is derived from cellulose, which is a wood product. There's a very strong molecular attraction, and the bond is incredible, if it's done right. Celluloid, you might know, is also the material used in early motion picture film stock for projection. It not only degrades over time, as we've sometimes seen, if it's subjected to the wrong conditions, it is incredibly flammable. There was that major Universal Studios warehouse fire a few years back that destroyed a huge collection of original film reels. That wasn't the first time either. A lot of Hollywood history is gone because it burned up. Once it starts going, it's all going to go. Well, that flammable nature makes it a hazardous material to ship. It's not produced in the US anymore, to any great extent, and crossing international borders with it, shipping is very expensive due to insurance costs. Stuart McDonald won't ship it to me, for instance. Most manufacturers now use ABS instead, which is acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. Add to that, the solvent-based glue which was used is pretty toxic stuff, and binding a guitar requires a worker to be right in close to see what they're doing. They need special breathing equipment and nitrile gloves because the solvent will go right through their skin, and in 20 years it's like, "Doctor, my fingers are all tingly and I can't really smell anything." Binding a guitar wearing gloves is a non-starter, really, because it requires a lot of dexterity to get things to line up. And it's a process that's not easily automated, although Taylor has been experimenting with liquid extrudable plastics to mold the binding in place and then route off any of the excess. But really, there's enough health and environmental risks associated with this that there's a genuine motivation for factories to find something else. Personally, I'd love to see wood binding on everything. Light-colored maple is a beautiful material, but the American consumer won't accept this. They want the quality that's inherent in plastic goods. Much of the attraction we feel for guitars is actually the microplastic within our own bodies reaching out to touch its kin. So Martin started using a new glue. It worked fine, until a few years later they learned that it didn't. Delamination started to show up, possibly because of seasonal movement. Remember, the binding is basically stretched into place. And if the guitar gets wider in the summer, narrower in the winter, it's being pulled back and forth. And this is why we usually see it start in the waist area. The glue, which is now relying on a physical bond with the plastic rather than chemical, isn't really strong enough to resist that force. And sometimes there's enough shrinkage that goes along with it that you can't actually press the binding back into place. Martin addressed this issue on a case-by-case basis in the early days, but by like 2016 or 17 it was, wait a sec, is this happening on all of them? I've heard tales of people getting a real runaround from the warranty service department, and they tried very hard not to acknowledge the extent of this issue. Like I said, you're probably not going to ever see an official press release. And of course, the keyboard warriors who want the world to burn suggest that this is indicative of serious decline in quality and we must cancel Martin forever. Maybe that's true. I would try and put it in perspective, though, like what it would be like for a company of Martin's size to try and do something along the lines of an actual recall. That would be all she wrote. 1833, 2027-ish, RIP. I don't think they would survive, because the number of guitars made between 2012 and 2020 is more than 2.4 million. And that could involve a full-time staff of like 25 people working for, I don't know, 4 months straight on this alone. You got to pay all these people a proper wage, plus the cost of shipping and administration. Shipping 2.4 million guitars, my conservative estimate is like $30 million. In a company that has 500 employees. Say goodbye. So we're left to our own devices. Martin did tell its certified repair reps that the glue to use will be a specific 3M CA glue. It's very expensive, but it is a super glue, which is okay until it gets somewhere where you don't want it to be. And it almost always does. There's always some finish issues, and it can basically double the length of the job. So I've got 2 guitars in with this issue at the moment. This one here, which is gorgeous. At first glance, it seems to be suffering less. This is a lovely D28E Retro from 2016. This is very tightly shrunk. Sometimes it can be pushed back in with just the delicate finger pressure. Not so in this case. Can we stretch it? Well, that's a can of worms. Using a heat gun and judicious movements and making some heat shields, you can, if you're very careful. The problem is, if the binding is sitting more than just a couple of millimeters away from the channel, by the time you've stretched it enough to get it back in place, it probably won't be thick enough. And it'll also be distorted. It'll be thick in some areas, thin in others. Also, I've seen the results achieved by someone who didn't know just how hot a heat gun can get. And he didn't just melt the lacquer, he burned it. It was a job I decided I couldn't take on. Here's the thing. Plastic of almost any description, if you leave it loose, celluloid included, it will shrink. If it's been a year, you might be able to get it back in place. If it's been 5, no way. This strip is probably 2 full millimeters shorter than it was in 2016, lengthwise. The same thing happens with loose pick guards. If I take an old one off to do crack repair or something, I always try and get it back on in a day or 2. And I store them clamped firmly between 2 boards while they're off the guitar, because sometimes they'll contract so violently that you'll see bare wood all the way around the outline if you've left them unrestrained. Both guitars show some humidity issues. The D28 Retro here had an open seam. On the Custom Shop 28, though, it's a much bigger story on the inside, because every single brace is loose from the top for at least part of its length. And the bass side forward finger brace is gone. It's nice they left a pencil line, so I know where it used to be. I need to separate portions of the binding that are still adhered, and we have to remember there is a layer of lacquer over them. So I'm putting in a fresh scalpel blade. Every time I show this blade holder, I get questions. It's a Veritas carving knife available from Lee Valley. Just be aware, it's much heavier and longer than you're probably expecting. I'll start next to the loose areas and very lightly score over the junction between binding and purfling, and I'll work my way towards the neck. In many areas, the lacquer will have already cracked along these lines. I'm doing this to try and create a clean separation and not have big chips of lacquer sticking to the binding and flaking off the body. There are already some chips and areas of delamination along the side. I'll go along here too. This requires a gentle touch. It's a slow process. So what are we going to do when we reach the area where the binding slips under the neck? Well, we need to separate it and pull it out, because we need the length. There's about 4 millimeters under there. I'll mark it with a pencil so we can see. Gentle tugs and wiggles, and it'll pop out. Up next, every gluing surface has to be scraped clean. The adhesive residue is kind of rubbery, it's not crispy, and it requires some work. Various implements can be used, like a razor blade. I also have several small scrapers in various formats. I'll finish with some 220 grit self-adhesive sandpaper on a flat block. I want to introduce some scratches that the glue can seep into for a more secure physical bonding action. So I'll be using this. This is called Canopy Glue, Formula 560 from Zap Adhesives. I learned about this stuff from Bo Hannum. I believe he heard about it from Doug Graham. These are other people in the community of guitar repair. This is a product used by model makers and RC car makers when they have to affix like glass windshields into model kits, and they don't want the mess or distortion that traditional model glue or CA causes. It's water-based, and it works well with the modern Martin binding. However, I have had a failure with it using a different kind of plastic binding. It dried and peeled right back off with a gentle touch. I think that was even in a video. So this might not be suitable for every purpose. On these Martins, however, a lot of us are using it. The other product I've had decent success with is actually Titebond 3. Guitar makers have been using original Titebond wood glue for like 50 years or so now. And Titebond 3 came out, probably around 2005 or so. It's a different formulation. It's designed for use in exterior work, like if you're making park benches or patio furniture and that kind of thing. It's really bulletproof stuff. It's designed to be, well, regular Titebond comes apart with heat and moisture. Titebond 2 is more water resistant. Titebond 3, you can boil it. That's their standard, and it won't come apart. So it's really irreversible in a lot of ways, except through mechanical kind of scraping and stuff. But this stuff works, and that's what I'm going to use. And I can be really generous with this in a way that I never could with CA style glue. I've got a fair amount of open time with this. It's not a super rush. Kind of like regular woodworking glue. And this is very much like binding a guitar from scratch. I just the tape on the corner, I go down on the side and pull this across. Now, there are different kinds of tape available for this. I've always used regular painter's tape. Stuart McDonald, for instance, makes a binding tape which is exceptionally strong when you stretch it. I generally don't find it necessary to stretch it that much because in this case the binding is supple enough to go right into the contour. And when I use wood bindings, like I bend them so that they're accurate and I don't have to like really muscle them in. But yeah, you know, it goes in. It's reasonably clean stuff. On the back it's the same deal, but in this case the ends are visible at the heel. And when we're done, there's likely going to be a gap where they meet. They will likely be quite snug in a little channel between the heel cap and the body, but with some persuasion, they'll come out just fine. By the time I've worked my way around to the heel again, there ends up being about a 2 millimeter gap. I'm just going to tape off around at the start. Because I get the cleanest results from using acetone binding goo. This is celluloid binding shavings melted in a jar with acetone to the consistency of a proper melting cheese, like a raclette or Emmental. Not too liquid, you know, sort of a Gruyere. Pack it on down in there. Now this should also slightly melt the binding on either side. When we're done, we should have pretty close to an invisible joint there. The binding on the Custom Shop guitar is white ABS rather than Ivoroid, and the black-white purfling strip is welded pretty strongly to the binding, so they came out as one piece. The stepped nature makes the task of scraping more painstaking. One thing to consider with a job like this is how much time it takes to peel off this much tape, because you're not scraping it up and yanking it off. It's probably 10 seconds per piece, and there's 120 strips, so that's 20 minutes. While the glue cures, we can address the braces. The main thing is I don't want to dislodge or have them fall off, because repositioning them in the right spot can be very frustrating. So I tend to do them in two stages. I'll clamp one half in place, glue the other, and then reverse it and do the other side. Right now I'm using some 220 grit paper to sand both the brace and the top. I use this paper which is self-adhesive, but I leave the backing on. It's smooth and it glides nicely and works well. Use a dry paper towel and dust off as much as I can. I use Tite Bond for this. The clamp jaw is cork padded. In some cases it's advantageous to make a clamp and caul that fits directly on the brace. Like old Gibsons with their sharply triangular section. These ones in the upper bout are wide enough that it's not necessary. When regluing braces with Tite Bond, let it sit in the clamps for at least 1 hour before moving on. You really don't want to string the guitar up or subject it to any serious force for 24 hours, but 1 hour is long enough for the glue to set enough that it's going to stay. This little montage shows the first 6 of what will be 11 separate glue ups. The missing finger brace was in the case. So I'm using magnets, pairs of magnets, to find the correct position that'll help me get it in the right spot. So another glue up. We're going to leave this guitar, the Custom Shop one, because there's other stuff to do and it will take longer than I have time to show. So we'll peel the tape off the other one. Like I said, you want to go over the edge at kind of an angle, because there is now, well, there always probably was, but there's definitely a break in the lacquer surface now. And you kind of want to go at it from both sides and at an angle rather than straight across. The canopy glue residue comes off with a little damp cloth. Some elbow grease. I'll chisel, scrape, or sand the little patch behind the heel. Get that nice and smooth. Little touch of thin super glue to seal the surface and give it some shine. There we are. Pretty clean job. The excess tension has been removed. Everything's sticking down in its place.